This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and you're listening to Python's Paradise, your film and music show. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena. And I got a great show lined up for you today. I have recently purchased an interesting book online, probably the most expensive book I've ever purchased, but well worth it. I'm not even midway through it. It's called Destroy All Movies. And I come into interest in this book because, well, I'm a big fan of the movie Class of 1984, Rock and Roll High School, Valley Girl, all mentioned here in this book exclusively. And so I thought I would check it out. Plus, it's kind of a backstory to how I used to dress way back in the day. And I happen to have the two editors of this book on the line from me, straight from Austin, Texas. We have Zack Carlson and Bryan Connolly. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello. Thank you. How do you do?
Not too bad. Do you know where I am here in Fredericton? Have you been up this way before?
No, we're still getting there. We're halfway there.
Well, you know what? You're my first dual interview. I've done 25 cult film-related interviews, and this is the first time I've had two people on.
I'm honored. We're honored.
Well, I love the book. I mean, I love the idea of using the pink and the black, kind of your, Bret Hart colors, I call those. Nice choices. How did that come about?
I was dealing with a designer whose name is Jacob Cubby, and he was trying to make sure that the book kind of captured the aesthetic of the era that we focused on. They were making movies with punks in them, all the way to the current day, unfortunately. But the stuff that was really vital and interesting was, of course, at the initial era of punk. And we wanted to capture, as things were going from kind of gutter aesthetics to new wave, the garishness and kind of, chaotic artistic aspect of all of that. So I talked to Bryan about it, and I begged the designer, who's a pretty respectable, talented and experienced designer, to just jam some like neon pink new wave color into the book. And he was a little hesitant to begin with, but he got into the spirit of it. And that's, that was our main, either neon pink or neon green were our two choices that we wanted to see in there the most, and pink won.
Well, it looks great. Now, I got to ask, I read your introduction to the book, but for the audience, where did this all originate? Like, what gave you the idea to do this? Because this is a tremendous amount of work in this book, very thick.
Yeah, it was stupid of us to take this on. What happened was that Bryan and I were both working at this tiny little 70-seat independent theater in Seattle around 2002. And it was called the Grand Illusion Cinema. And over the course of the same month, we showed two very different movies. One was the 1983 Penelope Spheris street kid drama called Suburbia. And the other one was an 80s boner comedy called Joysticks by Graydon Clark. And both those movies couldn't be more different in their content and style, but they both really focused on punk characters in the most opposite way. And both of them are completely entertaining and engrossing. And we were just talking about how great it was when we were kids watching movies and punk characters would show up and they would be so jarring and shocking and terrifying and bizarre. And it seemed like there was no way that people like that could actually exist in our world. And it was always such this forbidden lifestyle and fascinating to us when we were kids. And then as we got older and we became part of that scene ourselves, comparing the depiction in movies to the reality was often very, very different. But there was no cultural group that was more maligned and misrepresented than punks, for years and years. And that always made them a little more fascinating, a little more cartoonish. So we said, wouldn't it be fun if there was a book that kind of focused on both the good depiction of punks, the more accurate-ish one that you might get in a movie like Suburbia, versus the completely ridiculous, bizarre, party comedy version of punks that you see all the time. But then Bryan said, let's take this all the way and really research it. I'll let you take over.
And at first we thought it was going to be really easy because we're just kind of brainstorming all the movies we thought of, and we're like, oh, Star Trek 4, of course, yes. Oh, Howard the Duck, yeah, let's keep going. And we came up with a list of about like 50 movies over the course of one night, and we were like, this can't be so bad. And then the more we kind of dug into it, the more we realized it was going to be quite a task to like just find out. Because there really was no resource of like, here are punk movies. Like you kind of could find maybe a list of 30 on the internet, but we had to kind of make the list from scratch. So that's when we decided to go through Scarecrow Video, which was is still the largest video store in the world. And we spent a week digging through every movie they had there and just kind of looking at the box and being like, hey, this takes place in New York City. It's 1984. Do you think there's a punk in it? Sure, let's check it. And we kind of did that until we had a list of thousands of movies to go through.
Yeah, the list is about the size of like a small town phone book, really.
Yeah, I know. I lugged it here today. But I noticed you guys came under a little criticism because you didn't have like the Warriors on there and Taxi Driver and yeah.
Those movies don't have punk characters in them.
No, I agree.
Yeah, but people are gonna complain about anything you do because the internet has given, voice to the impotent. But I mean that's just the nature of.
When we made the book, we kind of had to set a list of guidelines as to what we thought counted as punk, because we had to make rules. Because if there weren't any rules, which is very unpunk, but we had to. If there weren't rules, then the book could go on forever. Because we've had people say like, well, why isn't like Pink Flamingos in there? Why isn't Rebel Without a Cause in there? Those guys have like a punk attitude, but we were like, no, it's not just about punk attitude. These are like, are these people part of the punk scene, punk culture in our minds or in the filmmakers' eyes?
Did you guys?
In a lot of cases, we would go to the filmmaker themselves if we had the opportunity, or maybe somebody who acted in the movie, and say, do you feel like this character was punk? But we talked to Michael Beck and Deborah Van Valkenburg from the Warriors at an event, and said, do you feel like there were any characters that were supposed to be punk rock in the movie? And they both thought about it, and they said, no, not really. It was just like street thugs. And so we're like, all right, well, they're the authority. They're in the damn movie. It's good enough for me.
Yeah, it kind of made me too wonder, and I get your point, because another film I thought about that wasn't in your book was Ms. 45, but I guess that wouldn't qualify either, would it?
Yeah, I mean, there's like junkies and weirdos and people from the art scene and fashion mutants and all kinds of people like that in the movie, but nobody that would expressly seem like they're representing somebody from the punk community.
Yeah. The ones that we got the most flack for not having was Over the Edge and Straight to Hell, right. Which we were like, no, there's no punks in those movies. And people would get angry, and we would have, like fights with people over whether they were punk or not.
Yeah, but I mean, it all came back to that same guideline, And there's people that get frustrated and say, well, here's some movie from 1998 where Henry Rollins plays a security guard. And it's like, yeah, but that's just, that's not a punk character. This stuff became so entrenched in our lives, and this constant desire to try to kind of define this and hone in on it got so intense for us that when we would leave the house, we'd be walking to get a slice of pizza, and Bryan would see a guy with a mohawk on the street and go, "There's one!" Like we were hunting these people like as if they were, food. Like it became so intense. But...
Well, I'm going to tell you, I looked through your book, and now Suburbia and Joysticks, I have not seen either one of those, but I looked at their trailers before doing this interview. Yeah, they both look very different, and they both, especially Joysticks, looks very fun.
Yeah, the book was actually dedicated to the writer-director of Suburbia and the lead punk character in Joysticks, just because they both offered an equal amount of inspiration to varying degrees, but in very different ways. But yeah, I mean, punk was used to either indicate that society was completely demolished and hopeless and annihilated, or that things were just out of control, wild, like party time, insane. So it was like a movie like Back to the Beach has punks like doing a conga line and giving their babies mohawks, and then there'll be like a movie like Ciao Tontine where it's like the hopelessness, of life is channeled through these punk characters. It's really varied. And then, of course, you get into post-apocalyptic stuff, where it's like everyone who's left on Earth is either a victim or has like a green mohawk,
Well, tell me, how did you go about getting your interviews?
That was more something I took on. Really, at the time, people were just, I don't think everyone was as besieged by, social media yet, and so a lot of these people were still accessible and still answering emails, and so you could look up, if it was somebody who was successful within the film industry, you'd look up their, professional contacts, like their agent, manager, etc. Or you could reach somebody through somebody who'd worked on their films before. But in other cases, somebody who had smaller roles or was a more independent director would just have a Facebook account, like Nick Zed. People like that, are very happy to be appreciated and have their work discovered. And so they were pretty easy to reach. But it was a surprise where in a lot of cases, the people that you think would be the least accessible, major names like Richard Hell, Ian Mackay, Martha Coolidge, who's still a working director, but she did Valley Girl, they gave the most, excited and present and compelling interviews out of everybody. Richard Hell and Ian Mackay interviews are hilarious, and people probably think of them as being a little bit detached or above this sort of thing. And those guys were incredible.
Well, it's interesting because you guys are my 25th cult film related interview since last April. And I've been reviewing movies since 1996. And I started here at CHSR in 2005, but I never started podcasting till last April when my former co-host and I locked on an interview with Tommy Wiseau. And I'm pretty sure The Room is not a punk film. But nonetheless, after we interviewed Tommy Wiseau, it was like, who else can we talk to? And right now, we've got one interview in common with somebody that I've been a fan of for over 30 years, and I even wished her happy birthday last week and still keep in touch. It was Lisa Langels from Class of 1984. Now, that's a movie that I was 10 years old when that originally came out. And it was shot up here in Canada, which is good for me. It's got that Canadian blood, and a lot of people in it, including Lisa, are Canadian. And wow, like I've done 2 interviews from Class of 1984, and with you talking to you guys, technically it's 3. I've had Lisa Langels on here, and I've had Mary Lynn Ross on here, and I know Stefan Arngren is somebody I've contacted. I've heard from him, but haven't been able to book him yet. But I am working on it. But I know from talking to Lisa, she said there's some people that didn't like working on it, and then there's some people that are totally, like herself, open to talking about it. How did you come across Class of 1984?
Oh, geez. The first time I saw that movie? Let me think about that. Do you remember yours?
I think because I was drawn to the video box. It was in the cult section of Hollywood Video, and I didn't know anything about it. And man, that movie's a humdinger. Because the only name I recognized at the time, because I was probably 14, was like, oh, Michael J. Fox. I know who that is. I know who he is. And he does not have a good time in that movie.
No, especially with that haircut.
Yeah, I came into Class of '84 after Suburbia. Suburbia was the one that I really got obsessed with, early in my teenage years. I think I was 14 or 15 when I saw it. And in Class of '84 is kind of somewhere between Joysticks and the more sympathetic version, where it's like a completely exaggerated, rabid version of what punks are like. And you expect in any case that there's a movie about basically children, like teenagers, that are at odds with an adult, that there's going to be some sort of redemption and some sort of resolution where the kids learn the error of their ways. And what I'm really amazed by Class of '84 is that that's not even an option. It's just like total vicious war between punks and adults, which most movies did not have the guts to do. And I think when I first saw it, I was probably more like 17, 18, and I was also drawn to it because I would watch any movie with, pre-90s movie with punks in it. And I was so impressed with just like how unrepentantly violent it was and misanthropic, which is still my favorite quality in any movie.
Well, it's interesting because I play Teenage Head on my show quite a bit, and yeah. I know they sing Ain't Got No Sense during the slam banging scene, but I think the song that's never ever mentioned, but I hear it during the scene when they get the girl stripping in the back room, is Little Boxes. And it's my favorite Teenage Head song, and I can hear it. And I know it's the first time, I told Lisa this, I said, this is like the first time you got a naked woman on screen, and I'm more concerned with listening to Little Boxes played by Teenage Head over the soundtrack.
Priorities are very important. When I interviewed Lisa, she was going through a lot of nostalgic episodes throughout the conversation, and at one point she started thinking about, it's so fun to look back on all of these experiences on that film, and she said she wanted to reach out to her co-star Keith Knight from the movie, and I was put in a position where I had to break to her that he had just passed away, and it made her very upset during the interview, so I felt very guilty about that. I hope that wasn't too abrupt and painful for her, but I had to break the news that her friend had died.
It's sad, too, because, Keith Knight was in Meatballs, and I did one interview from Meatballs. I had Christine DeBelle on here, and I talked a little bit about Keith Knight. And it's interesting, Keith Knight coming from Meatballs, where he was just this friendly, nerdy kid, and then he's this hooligan barnyard in this film, and I always joked, I said, Spaz became drugstore.
There's a great Canadian-made movie. It's the Nova Scotia film called Siege that Keith Knight is in too. That's about a police strike and total rampant marauding crime going on in Nova Scotia. And Keith Knight plays a mentally disabled teenager in that movie, and that film's incredible. It's so bizarre it doesn't have more of a following. In the original edit of that movie, there were punks, but they were cut out for the theatrical and video release.
Well, like I said, it's sad that Keith Knight is no longer with us. Again, I'm a huge Lisa Langels fan. I've had her on here. She's my longest interview I had. I had her on here for 2 hours and loved her. And another person that I found interesting in that film, and when I found out he was a dancer, a professional dancer, it made sense because it reminded me of Sendell Bergman and Conan the Barbarian, who was a dancer, and these swift moves she made when she sword fought. Neil Clifford, I found a standout, especially when he fights with Norris before the table saw scene. Just the way he moves with that chain and the choreographing to that fight was splendid.
Yeah, he kind of gets the least attention because he's the least, garish of the punks. He looks just kind of like he could, be an auto mechanic or something. But he's really great in the movie, and he's got a real intensity even though he's a small guy. So, yeah, I think he definitely holds his own among that crew.
Well, looking at it from a criminology standpoint, I would say, because I was kind of Michael J. Fox in school until people found out I had a love for snakes, and they didn't know whether I owned a python or not. So, but there was a time when I lived quite a few things from class of 1984, except I was never knifed in a cafeteria.
I'm glad to hear it.
But I went to school with every one of those punks, and I'll tell you how it breaks down. Peter Stegman, Timothy Van Patten's character, is all mouth. He would never be the guy to challenge you after school by himself. He would always have to have company. And the moment you see his true colors is the moment Mr. Norris is outside his apartment door, and he's frail in the presence of his mom because he's vulnerable. That is who Stegman is. Then you got Drugstore, who's very, very similar. He's with the gang because he can provide drugs and whatever they need. But he's another one who would be more or less, he would go with the gang and pick on somebody like myself. I've seen his type. But he would never bother me by himself. But then you got somebody like Fallon, Neil Clifford. And I break it down like this. He would be the member of the gang I'd be most afraid of. Because even when he was almost about to get his arm sawed off on that table saw, he was not giving up. And he pretty much, even going to his death, he was not going to give in. He was the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most psychotic one of the gang. He would be the kind of guy who would probably meet me after school and beat the living hell out of me with that chain. Then you got Barnyard, who's very similar to Fallon. Barnyard has one little difference from Fallon, though. And that you see when they bring that kid in who wants to be a member of the gang. And you see Barnyard with the little bat behind his head, and he's very, very playful with them in an intimidating manner. And that was probably the one difference between Barnyard and Fallon. And then we have Patsy. Patsy would be the reason why I would get in trouble with that gang. Because the moment she found out that I had eyes for her, I'd be in trouble. Either A, they would try to use her as a way to get me to do something, as you sound with that kid. And since I have a conscience, I would not go to stab somebody in a cafeteria. Or she would use the opportunity to have me get the living hell beat out of me. And so I've watched this movie well enough to know the types, because I've been around each and every one of those characters. And as Lisa found out, I watched the movie so carefully, I pointed out stuff that even she did not bring up during her interesting little... she taught us a lot about sign language in that movie.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But that's kind of my little breakdown on Class of 1984, as I knew every one of them, and that's a sign of a good movie when you can relate to what's going on. And I wouldn't wish high school back on me at all.
What's funny about that movie and a lot of these movies is that in reality, in my experience, the punks were always the ones that were getting beaten up and were the ones that were being picked on. Like, we were kind of the outcasts, and the bullies would go after them because it was also really easy to spot and kind of hone in and be like, this person's different, let's punch them in the stomach.
Whereas in movies, it's almost always the punks that are the aggressors and the...
Yeah, like in Savage Streets and...
Yeah,
Class 84.
Rebel High.
Yeah.
Well, Class of 1984, like I said, it's a big favorite of mine. I got the new Blu-ray release, and like I said, you're like my third interview related to that film. I also had, as I said, Mary Lynn Ross has come on here as well, and I still have contact with them as well, so that's always been nice. But I'm going to tell you another film you guys focused on that I absolutely love, and I may have an interview possibly in April from somebody in that film, is Rock and Roll High School. Love that film.
Yeah, that movie is one of my more favorite ones. And I'm more drawn to the crazier, like, party sort of punk film. And Alan Arkush is such a great, fun filmmaker. And his movies, like, they really do feel like pages from Mad Magazine, like, thrown onto a movie screen. Like, just a joke per second. It's like, but not in a way like a Zucker Brothers movie. It's not like Airplane. Like, it really has its own kind of, like, goofy 12-year-old tone. And that mixing with the Ramones is interesting because those guys are kind of goofy, but they sing about, you know, heroin and male prostitution and things like that. And so, like, that mixed with this kind of tone is, like, really kind of, and they play it up too. Like, the Ramones, you are having the best time ever. Like, you singing in the shower, like, having this crazy, wild fan base. Like what must it have been like to play on stage and see, like, a guy in a big mouse costume, like, in the audience? Like, it's just such a insane, fun movie. I can watch that movie every day. I'll never get sick of that movie.
Oh, I agree. They got that nice little song, Beat on the Brat with the Baseball Bat. Did you ever hear that one?
In the concert scene, they had to get all these extras to come hang out for, 12 hours while the Ramones were playing. And towards the front row in a few of the shots, you can see three members, for most shots, the two lead members of the Germs are standing in the audience watching the Ramones. So Darby Crash and Pat Smear are the extras at the punk show.
So the idea of them hanging out with Paul Bartel is hilarious to me.
And the Giant Man.
Oh, yeah. Paul Bartel, sadly, no longer with us.
I know, but it's still in our hearts. All the great people are no longer with us.
Well, I'm hoping to have Dee Young on here within the next month or so. I have made contact with her. But one person I would love to interview, I've tried to contact her, but I'm going to try again, is PJ Souls. Now, I've been a fan of hers about as long as I've been a fan of Lisa Langle's. And with being in Halloween and Carrie and Stripes, Rock and Roll High School, like that's her central starring role as Riff Randall, rock and roller.
Right. Yeah, she's great. She's really still active, and she does a lot of horror conventions because of her involvement in Halloween, the movie. And yeah, she loves to talk about this stuff, and I'm sure she'd be overjoyed to revisit it with you.
How did you guys get her? Was it through Facebook?
I had done an event through a manager of hers. This is many years ago. Where I actually brought her and Clint Howard out to be at a 35 millimeter film screening of Rock and Roll High School.
Okay.
We had a great time, and the next night we were going to be doing a screening with her. I think of possibly Halloween, but I got arrested at the airport and thrown in jail for a third-degree federal felony terrorism charge.
Oh.
And when I got out, it was a misunderstanding, obviously. When I got out, I had missed the rest of the event because I had spent, some time in jail, and she had left a little signed photograph of herself that is like it's her smiling as Riff Randall, and it said, "Zack, hope you had fun in jail. Don't get raped."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was very sweet.
Did you frame that?
No, I still have it.
I've got an autograph. I've got a couple of autograph pictures of her because I autographed hunt in the 90s, and I've got one headshot of her and one of her and Bill Murray in Stripes before he does his little deed with her on the stove. But yeah, PJ is somebody I'm really hoping to get on here because I would love to have her on here. Another one I wanted to reach out to was Mary Warrenov, who played Miss Togar, but her website, there's no contact section, so it makes it a little difficult. But she is plays one of these antagonists that you can't help but love.
Oh, she's incredible in that movie. She says that she ad-libbed that line, "Does your mother know you're a Ramon?" I think it's so good.
Yeah, she was great. That movie, very, very colorful. Of course, they got that little geeky kid, I think was a writer on the film or something. They kept stuffing in the locker.
Yeah.
And you get a goofier Van Patten in that movie.
True.
Yeah, like...
We're covering all our Van Patten ground. That's good.
What did you think of his Arkush's stylistic follow-up film, Get Crazy?
You know what? It's interesting because until I read your book, I had not heard of Get Crazy. I looked it up, and it's an Alan Arkus film, and yes, it was just follow-up to Rock and Roll High School, isn't it?
Yeah. Not in continuity, but just in style. But go on.
I like it more than Rock and Roll High School because it's even like the jokes that were in Rock and Roll High School are even heightened in Get Crazy. It really is like they cram as many jokes as they can in this film. It's like a million trillion jokes in a movie that can't handle it, but it works. It's and you have Lee Ving and Fear in there doing one of the craziest performances of all time. Like Lee Ving in that movie is basically Animal from the Muppets. Like he's just like this unruly, like subhuman. So they have to keep in shackles, and then when they let him out, he just like causes the craziest of messes. And he's incredible in that. Ed Begley Jr. is the villain, but also like the movie just has tons of cameos, and it has the same spirit and feel as a Rock and Roll High School, but even more sort of like in the gutter in a good way, where it has less plot, it has more stupid things, but in like the greatest way that you'd want it.
Well, I've never seen Get Crazy. Tell me what it's about. Get me fired up for it.
Well, Alan Arkush himself describes it as a movie that has 3,000 jokes but 5,000 punchlines.
Okay.
And he said that disparagingly, but to me, that's a bonus. Like, it's just a completely chaotic examination of a huge concert happening on New Year's Eve where every type of band plays. There's hippies, there's blues artists, There's like a go-go type girl band. There's like punk maniac. There's like a sensitive artist type played by Lou Reed making fun of himself. Like actually hilarious. Like somehow they even got Lou Reed to have a sense of humor for 10 minutes. Like the movie's a miracle. And meanwhile, there's this villain who wants to destroy the theater with everyone in it so he can have the real estate. This sounds pretty dry and stupid, but the movie is completely insane.
Well, you've got me checked out. I have got to see this movie.
Yeah,
Now,
it's the only other movie I can think of that is similar to is like Gremlins Part 2, The New Batch, like where it's just sort of like this no rules sort of movie that shouldn't work. And some people say it doesn't, but we say it does.
Yeah, it's a total celebration of fun in every way.
I've actually had Belinda Blansky on here from Gremlins, and she was talking about her tiny little cameo she did in Gremlins 2, where she requested to have popcorn and pop so she could, during the movie theater scene, so she can like let it dump on the people in front of her. She was a sweet. Belinda was actually the one that got me in touch with Mary Lynn Ross, because in class of 1984, Stegman, when he's watching television, he's actually watching Bobby Joe and the Outlaw, which was an earlier film by Mark Lester, and Belinda Blansky was in that with Mary Lynn Ross, and she got me hooked up with her.
I've seen that movie. I like it.
Are you a fan of Class of 1999?
You know what? I have actually not seen that. I know which one you're talking about. I'm aware that Malcolm McDowell was in it. But there's no Lisa Langles in it, so I'm turned off.
Yeah, there's no recurring characters, but the hatred between the students and the teachers is as raw and real as ever, except in 99, it switches where the students are actually the protagonists and the teachers are the villains. And it's really entertaining.
It has one of the best spanking scenes of any movie of all time.
Maybe number one.
Number one best spanking scene ever.
Lethal spanking.
Lethal spanking.
Well, one film you got down here, it hasn't come out on Blu-ray yet, and I'm so waiting for it, was Valley Girl. I've reached out, tried to get Deborah Foreman to come on here, but she said she's not doing podcast at the moment. I'm like, hopefully, once I get my roster up, maybe I can convince her to come on here, but I'm waiting for Valley Girl to come out on Blu-ray, and with Nicolas Cage having such a screw up with some of his film choices as of late, it's nice to look back and see him in this, and I think Valley Girl was a terrific film.
Oh, it's a masterpiece, definitely.
And that was, of course, an early Martha Coolidge film as well. I think one of her better films.
Yeah. Nicolas Cage's performance in that is so endearing. Like, he plays, like, that's the best kind of punk character you can do, where you just, like, he's wild, he's got this fun spirit, but, like, you really have this, like, nice little quiet sadness that he has. That part where he pulls out the little kazoo and blows into it when he's, like, his heart is breaking or he's just, like, crushed out is so, like, great. And I guess he improvised that. I guess they didn't know he had a kazoo in his pocket, and at the end of the scene, he just, like, took it out and blew on it. Everyone was like, perfect, cut.
Yeah, that's an early example of, a human approach to punk characters, because that really wasn't the popular mode, especially in wider release movies like that. So that was a big step.
And of course, you got listed down here too. I mentioned a lot of films you have multiple interviews from, because I'm guessing those were films you were really, really big on. And Repo Man, that's another popular film from the era with Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, that's an untouchable movie. It's Alex Cox's great masterpiece, like right out of the gate. He nailed it.
Probably his best movie.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that's the case.
The funny thing about Repo Man was I knew the whole story before I ever saw the movie, because when I was a child, when I was about 7, one of my bedtime stories my mom would tell me was she would sit on the bed and tell me the entire plot of Repo Man.
Wow.
And so I remember, like, thinking forever, being like, whoa, there's, like, aliens in the trunk of a car, and they melt people. Like, I can't wait to be old enough to see this movie. This is so crazy. And she told this story many times. Like, it was one of my more favorite bedtime stories, was her recasting Repo Man, because my parents were big fans. And then once I was old enough, I ran to the mall and bought a VHS of it. And then I believe the next day I ran back to the mall and bought the soundtrack, because I was just, like, so... Like, that was definitely, like, a gateway into the punk world for me, was Repo Man. I think for a lot of people, because it's a pretty like for a movie that was low budget, it was a pretty big for a lot of people. Like and a lot of people saw that movie in the video age. I think you're just kind of drawn to the cover and the name, and you're just like, I'm gonna watch this movie. And man, that is one of my favorite movies ever.
I think my gateway was Class of 1984. I'm going to guess. I was born in 1972, so I was 10 years old when Class of 1984 originally hit theaters. Were you guys born in the 70s or the 80s?
I'm a 75er.
I was born in 1980.
Okay, so you guys are both younger than me. So one of you came out the year Jaws came out, and the other one came out the year Dressed to Kill came out.
Both good movies.
Yes, I love those a lot. Nope. Yeah, Repo Man. I got to ask you about some films that came out after the book. The book came out in 2010, right?
Yeah, very end of 2010. It was officially a 2011 release, but yeah.
Well, I have to ask you about, like, I know you had the Road Warrior in that book. What did you think of Mad Max Fury Road?
Well, I thought it was a huge turd. I hated it.
Really?
It made me furious. Like, not that sounds like a joke. It made me livid. I'll say that instead of furious. But yeah, I was so depressed while watching it, and I thought, man, this sucks. Everyone's gonna hate this. What a bloodbath! Like the director's gonna get lynched. And then after the screening, the director came up to do a Q&A on stage, and everybody was just acting like they'd seen the greatest movie I've ever made. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Everyone is insane.
I loved it. It was my favorite movie of 2015.
I gotta say, I must be insane because I thought it was terrific. I thought it was a nice homage to look at it this way. George Lucas screwed up big time when he did Phantom Menace because he forgot who his audience was with the previous Star Wars films. What I liked about George Miller is that he remembered who his audience was, and it's an interesting homage to Road Warrior, at least in my opinion.
I don't know. I'd rather watch Jar Jar Binks go fishing for 10 hours than watch Fury Road again.
Okay, I'll have to ask you about a film that was shot right up here in Atlantic Canada. Actually shot in Halifax that I'm going to guess you guys have seen. I'll be surprised if you haven't because it's one of those films up here that actually gained a cult following, and that is Hobo with a Shotgun.
We just wrote a script. Bryan and I wrote it together. That is going to be a feature film directed by Jason Eisner, who directed Hobo with a Shotgun.
What did you think of Hobo with a Shotgun?
I love it. Jason's a great guy, and his heart is in the right place, and he really has a good sense of style. And he's able to make, because around that time, because that was like, it came from the trailer that he made for Grindhouse, like in that competition, and he won. And neither of us really like Grindhouse, the movie, and neither of us really like Black Dynamite or any of that kind of fake old movie thing.
The ironic
kind of like, oh, let's make it, like we like Machete and stuff like that. Like we are not fans of those kind of movies. We'd rather watch the original thing. But I think Jason did a great job because it kind of has like that kind of 80s like scummy feel, but it really is his own thing. He has his own voice. Like, and it isn't just like brought down with like, oh, the film is scratchy. Oh, look at the haircuts. Like it really, in a way, feels timeless because it's like it has kind of an 80s feel, but it doesn't really take place in the 80s. Like it's its own world that he made, and I applaud him for that.
I think it's because he's celebrating the things he loved about these certain types of movies rather than making a mockery of them.
Now tell me, if you did an update of Destroy All Movies, would Hobo with a Shotgun go in it?
Yes, but we don't want to reach beyond the 20th century because punk culture got so embarrassing after that point that we're just keeping it back there.
Yeah, we're working on hopefully doing a second edition, and I think we're still going to we are definitely only going to stay in the 20th century, I think, because it's hard to distinguish what is punk after like 1992.
Because it became fashion rather than lifestyle.
And so like now when I go to the grocery store and every checkout person there has green hair, a pierced nose, like are they punk? Or are they into something else? Like it's really hard to figure that out. Like once like Hot Topic opened its doors, it sort of was like a free for all and we were polite enough to include the 90s. But I think after, and it was not to say that punk is dead. Like there are people carrying on the spirit for sure, and there are great bands and they're still great movies. But I feel like just for the sake of us keeping our sanity, it's hard to like have those same guidelines for what is punk once you get into the point where Blink-182 counts as punk, you know?
Yeah, that's everything's falling apart under that. There's a new movie coming out called Green Room. That's an independent film that takes place within the punk community, and it's a masterpiece. And the guys, you know, in it, the depiction of the characters is really spot on. But that's such a rarity anymore. And like when rave culture and everything is this kind of, everything's coalesced in like this big youth mess, and it just becomes more work to distinguish it than it's really worth. So we're focusing on like the first 25 years of punk culture.
Well, going back to Hobo with a Shotgun, one of the people that was in this movie, and this brings back to my neck of the woods here in Atlantic Canada. You got that first scene where the guy's got the manhole cover on his head, and they take his head off. And that actor was Rob Wells, and he was from the Trailer Park Boys. Now, the Trailer Park Boys is shot up here in Halifax, and I was wondering if you've ever watched that show.
Oh, I love that show. I've seen them live. They came to town and did a live show, and that was amazing. Like, I think those guys are really, really funny.
Well,
they're all pals with Jason, the director of Hobo. He actually worked on, I think, the last few seasons and specials for the Trailer Park Boys. That show, again, like in a way, like Hope with a Shotgun, like when you think of people living in a trailer park and that kind of comedy, I usually roll my eyes and be like, oh no, here comes a mullet joke, here comes like poor people jokes. But that show, like the characters are so endearing, and they kind of is very respectful, and like it makes fun of it for sure, but like you love everyone in that show, and they're like, yes, they make mistakes and they're stupid, but you want to keep watching it, and you want them to, you keep wanting them to succeed, even though they keep ending up in jail.
You know, it's interesting you say this, because a lot of people I interview, they have no idea what part of Canada I'm from. And I think Lisa Langles, was the only person I've interviewed that even knew who the Trailer Park Boys was. And nonetheless, it's interesting because there's a petition on Facebook to pitch to get them to host Saturday Night Live. But it's interesting. There's 3 Trailer Park Boys movies, and of course, Ivan Reitman produced the first one. But what I find interesting, I had somebody tell me prior to interviewing you guys, because I mentioned that you guys are from Austin, Texas, and we got talking about Trailer Park Boys eventually in the conversation somewhere, and they said, you know, Texan people love the Trailer Park Boys. And of course, I never knew this.
They do, yeah. It was when I saw them, they played one of the larger theaters downtown Austin, and it was packed. Like, there wasn't an empty seat. And that was one of the more rowdier crowds I've ever seen on a live show that wasn't like music, because they're on stage doing these skits, but because of the loose nature of their show, like it was very lots of audience participation. There was a point where they got off stage and were like, hey, let's start selling hamburgers. How about $10 a hamburger? And like a mob of people ran up to pay $10 for these crappy-looking hamburgers. And I'm like, this is the craziest live show I've ever seen. Like, what is this? This is nuts. And I think, I don't know why Texas has such a connection with Trailer Park Boys. I manage a video store in town, and it certainly rents like gangbusters. Like, people can't get enough of that show.
Well, who's your favorite Trailer Park Boy? I like Ricky.
Yeah, I'm really into Bubbles,
Bubbles? Did you guys see SwearNet?
I have, yes.
My former co-host hated that movie so much. He told me that he would get me a free pass to see it because he didn't want me to pay for it. He said, you'll hate it. You'll hate this movie. I went there, and he spent the whole movie watching me laugh my friggin' ass off at this movie that's gone under. It beat South Park in the World Book of Guinness Records of having the most F-bombs in a movie, 935 uses of the F-word in SwearNet. And I thought the movie was hilarious, and he didn't understand why I liked it.
Yeah, when I started watching that show, I was reluctant, but I loved it so much that I watched every season of Trailer Park Boys, I think, within the span of 1.5 months.
Yes, I love that. And another movie I got to bring up that came out since your book, and I guess I'm talking about the American remake, but I suppose you can talk about the the original version as well, is the girl with the dragon tattoo.
Yeah.
Well,
that would have definitely come into the book if we included those. Yeah.
I gotta say, loved Rooney Mara in the update version. She was wonderful.
Yeah. Those movies are really intense. Those are upsetting. I never saw the sequels to the Swedish one, the Part 2 and Part 3. And I don't know if they will make American ones or not, because I think the David Fincher one didn't do so well, surprisingly. I think because they released it at Christmas time, which is not the best for a rape-filled murder movie.
Do you want me to tell you an interesting tidbit that comes to mind?
Sure.
When I interviewed Lisa Langels, she told me a story, and I think I was the only one she told this to at the time. She is a hand double in that movie.
Oh, in the American one?
Yeah.
What part?
I'm trying to remember where it was. There was, and I remember because she said a friend of hers convinced her to do this because it was a David Fincher film because she thought it was ridiculous, a hand model. I think it's towards the end where she's checking stuff out. You'll have to listen to my interview with her. I could give you access to that.
Sure.
The interview with her is 2 hours, though, but never boring for me. But she had mentioned that she was a hand double in one of the scenes in it. And I thought, wow, like I thought that was just an interesting little tidbit of information. And
Did you get an IMDb credit for being a hand model?
I don't think she got credited for it, not as far as I know. But I'm not sure how that came up. But in their interview, I'd have to go back and re-listen, but I must say I found that interesting. I never heard of hand doubles before, and quite frankly, Lisa's beautiful enough. You want to see her on screen more than her hands, but nonetheless, I thought that was interesting.
I'm actually friends with somebody who was Freddy Krueger's hand double for the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 trailer, the one that has the punks in it, the Dream Warriors, and he was asked to be that Freddy hand that pops out of, like, I think it pops out of a table or something like that, and he got to wear the Freddy glove, so he's Ron Deutsch. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you guys are like the first people I've had on here actually knew who the Trailer Park Boys was, and I'm going to tell you, I even mentioned them to Adrienne Barbeau, and she had no idea who they were, because I find here in Canada, the film industry, I wish the government would push it a little more, because I know, and I mentioned this to Lisa, like back when they did Class of 1984, which is a Canadian film, and there was a bunch of those films that she was in, like Deadly Eyes and Happy Birthday to Me, all Canadian, and I thought maybe we might get an extra push with Hobo with a Shotgun gaining such a massive cult following, but I don't know. I wish Canada would pull their socks up, because I think there's opportunity down here.
Yeah. It's hard to tell with Hobo with a Shotgun its popularity, because in this town it certainly was popular, because we have the Alamo Draft House here and Fantastic Fest, which gave that movie such a huge, in a short, such a huge push. So we're kind of like blinded by whether, because in my mind it's like, oh, that movie is really popular, but who knows if anybody outside of Austin thinks of this the same way.
You know, it's interesting. Of course, Mr. Leahy, John Dunsworth, was not in Hobo with a Shotgun, but Molly Dunsworth, his daughter, was the little escort girl that Rutger Hauer was helping in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's his daughter. I don't know if you knew that, but maybe. Oh, huh?
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and she shows up there with that interesting get-up there. Which was an interesting little costume idea. No, I am loving your book. It was quite pricey. I ordered it on Amazon, and probably the most expensive book I ever ordered. But I could have probably gotten it cheaper. But when I go on Amazon, I want to get the best copy I could, so I went with something that was listed as almost new or something like that. And I got a decent copy of it here, and I'm going through it. I like how you guys got that thing all stitched together with the pink and the black and the white, and I love the fact that Class of 1984 is on the cover. How did that beat out the other films for the cover?
Well, the designer was able to do everything. He had the first pass, and then we would have to approve it. And he wasn't necessarily a punk person, so a lot of this stuff was new to his eyes. And so he would approach it objectively. Like somebody like you or us, we already know what Class of 1984 means to us, but somebody who's, you know, coming into it for the first time is going to look at it the way that we did the first time we saw that VHS tape on the shelf of a video store, where it just like grabs you. And so for him, that image of the hand-painted cover of the, you know, poster and VHS release of Class 84, it was so arresting and it was so exciting to him that he's just like, well, I don't know what we could make up or what we could even commission from an artist that would be more effective than this image of these people that are clearly exaggerated and clearly crazy and non-realistic versions of punks, but also like, you know, really intense and really, you know, intimidating and all of this stuff. It wasn't just cartoonish and clownish, but there's also something that's a little bit powerful about the image. And he said, this is as good as it gets. Like, let's just use that.
Yes. When the Trailer Park Boys played there in Austin, did you guys meet them?
I did not, no. Too many people, too many like young ladies that wanted to meet them, and I'm not one of those, unfortunately.
Brian's very attractive, but he's married, so yeah.
You don't think if he wore the Bubbles glasses, he'd get free access?
Maybe, I don't know.
If you had a gut on you like Randy, maybe?
I definitely have a big gut on me like him.
There you go.
But I love cheeseburgers too. Like I can't stop eating them.
Plus, he's swear man.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what, guys? I gotta say congratulations on this book. I think it's a great read. I just got done to the end of the Class of 1984 part, so I'm only in the C section on this, but I'm hoping to get some more interviews from this. I've got a few ideas coming up, but if you guys have any suggestions of people I should go after who are easy access, I'm all ears.
I'm trying to think about it. We had the contact sheet was a Word doc, stupidly, that I had on my computer that died. And so for us to get anything else out of the book, if we wanted to go back to somebody to expand their interview, I'd have to start over from scratch. So most of my, you know, spelunking just happened via the internet, Google, IMDb Pro, stuff like that. I'm just trying to track people down. You'd be amazed who has an active Facebook account, though.
You know what? That's where I got hold of a lot of people, because I remember after, like, I interviewed Tommy Wiseau, I remember that I was like, who else do I want to contact? I remember at the time, I just wanted to talk to women I was attracted to from movies at the time. And I remember two that came to mind. One was Adrienne King from Friday the 13th, and the other was Lisa Langels from Class of 1984. And I got Adrienne King right away, and I was just astounded that, wow, I'm actually talking to this person, and had her on the phone. And then it took about a month, and then I heard back from Lisa. And then I had her on as well, and she sang me Happy Birthday, which is the single greatest moment of me on this podcast. I got her to do that. And, you know, I like her. She's Canadian, so obviously I'm still a loyal fan. So, yeah, and I remember during the interview I asked her the same question that Roddy McDowell asked her in the classroom. And I got a chuckle out of it because she said, I've never been asked that question before. And I said, I think Roddy McDowell asked you that question. And she says, you are sharp. But she was wonderful. And I'm always willing to support Canadian artists, especially the ones that still, even though they're in the States, they're still remain Canadian. Because I hate it when people leave Canada and then they denounce their Canadian citizenship, because I think we got a lot of promising things going on in this country. You guys been up in Canada before?
Oh yeah, we're from Washington State, so we were really close for a while there. So we would go to Vancouver all the time. Yeah, I love it up there.
I think that was where
ice cream up there one time.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, I used to be in a relationship with a woman who lived in Toronto, and so I was up there quite a bit.
Yeah. Was there anybody you tried to contact for your Destroy All Movies book that declined you?
Yeah, Nicolas Cage.
I bet you could get him now.
Maybe. Hopefully, we'll try for the next edition.
Did he decline, or did you just not hear back from him?
It's usually the managers who decline, right? Like they don't even pass it along to the person you're trying to reach. But there's a few people, and there's people who only want to do it for money, which
we don't have.
Which we don't have and never will.
We had people that said no, and then when it came out, they were like, "Why didn't you ask me to be interviewed?" And we're like, "We did."
Yeah. Like Alan Moyle, who directed Times Square, I did an event with him, and he's just like, "This book was so fun. Like, why didn't you interview me?" And I said, "I wrote you 18 emails over the course of 3 years."
Well, you know what? You interviewed one person. I don't even know if I should say who he is over the air because it probably wouldn't be fair. But he got back to me and told me he'll only do podcasts. He charges $300, and I'm like, I had Adrienne Barbeau on here for free. I'm not giving this limited person from a movie $300 to do my podcast.
Yeah, that's the whole convention spirit where now everyone, they charge $50 for an autograph, all this stuff. So it's become too much of a business now, and it's not about the entertainment side of it, unfortunately. But there's still many, many exceptions, and we had many great people that were very generous with their time. So it's, you know yourself, you can still be done. But speaking of Adrienne Barbeau and, Lisa Langle, like, objectively, you have to admit that Bryan and I are the most physically attractive people that you've talked to. The most beautiful women you've talked to are us, right?
You two?
Yeah.
I would have to see you through Bubbles' glasses.
Okay, well, we'll set that up.
I mean, I've had Melanie Kenneman on here from Friday the 13th, Part 5, and I'm going to tell you, she's gorgeous. And it's the first time, and I got her on Facebook, and she looked at one of my pictures, and she put underneath, hot. And I'm like, I've never considered myself hot, but I'll take that from her. I'll take that from her. But yes, I have had some pretty gorgeous women on here. Christine DeBelle's been on here. I mean, I've had some lovelies, so there you go.
All right, well, we're ready to compete. We'll put on bikinis.
Well, you know what, guys? I appreciate you guys taking the time to come on here today and promote this book, and it was well worth the price to get. And
thank you.
Yeah, and when I get this podcast up, it's going to be a few weeks because I just interviewed somebody from the Ray Harryhausen Foundation today. Though their podcast is going to go up for a couple of weeks, so it might be about 3 weeks. But when I get this up on a podcast, I'll send you guys the link, and you guys can post it on your Facebook, your webpage, wherever it is that you want to post it.
We'll gladly do that.
Yeah, and if you guys like, I could send you a list of other interviews I've done. If you want the links to any of them,
I'd love to see listen to some other ones.
Yeah, I've done you guys are 25, so
The lucky number 25.
You're the lucky, and you're my first duo. So there you go.
Yeah, where you're like, this is your aluminum anniversary or something.
There you go. So I could send you guys a list of the people I've interviewed, and if you guys want to check out any of the other interviews, I'm more than happy to give you access to that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. Well, thank you guys for coming on the show. Promoting Destroy All Movies, a complete guide to punks on film. And class of 1984, Rock and Roll High School, Valley Girl, all the greats. And, of course, you guys know who the Trailer Park Boys are. Finally!
We win.
Finally, get somebody from the States to admit they know who they are.
Well, thanks for having us. It's been fun.
It's been fun. Well, God bless, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.